Hello, I'm starting a series based on a Bible curriculum that stretches through 7 different grades. For this first one, we will look at the material for grade 6. That's middle school, depending on which system of high school you are using. Now, in grade 6, we are looking at the way in the Hebrew Bible. The whole series is called The Way and the Word. But in this one, we focus on the stories that are related to the Hebrew Bible, or what we call the Old Testament. So we'll begin with our first story today, and that is Adam and Eve. Well, Adam and Eve were the first humans, the first people that God created. Okay, and so that is the first thing to take note of. The word Adam originally simply means human. Later on, it became a proper name. But there's something very special about this couple, because when God was about to create them, he made this statement: let us make humans in our image, in our likeness. And so Adam and Eve were created in the likeness or the image of God. Now, I don't think that had anything to do with physical resemblance. Clearly, as we can see in the rest of the Bible, it's not. But there are 3 qualities, or you might say powers, that God gave to Adam and Eve. The first is the ability to create life. The second is the ability to think and learn. The third is the ability to make decisions, to make choices. God gave them a beautiful garden home called Eden, full of trees, full of flowers, full of fruit, lots of rivers and waters. The earth was perfect. They were perfect. However, how could they be sure that the ability to think and the ability to make choices was for real? So God set up 2 trees. One was called the tree of life. The other one was called the tree of knowing. It's a little bit longer name, but I think that's easier to remember. God said, if you eat from this tree, obviously there will be life. But if you eat from this tree of knowing, then you will have a certain kind of knowledge that will lead to death. And that is not my plan for you. But you have to decide. And so one day, as things happen, we don't know how long it was before they reached that stage. Adam and Eve were by that tree, and Eve looks at the tree, and a voice in the form of a snake serpent spoke to her and says, can you eat anything in this garden? Yes, we can eat everything except this tree. Well, what's wrong with this tree? So the snake eats a fruit and tempts her. And that resulted in what we call the problem of sin. It brought an attitude and a lifestyle that is contrary to God. People have often wondered, what was that fruit that she ate? Well, most Christians, based on a European model of Christianity, believe that it was the apple. Okay, and the reason perhaps is because it was such a common fruit in Europe. Now, a friend of mine many years ago in Singapore, he believed it was a mango. And his explanation was, well, you see, when Adam and Eve ate that fruit, God said, man, go. I hope you catch that. But if we look at the most common fruit in Bible times, pomegranate, it's also a power fruit, by the way. And so it's quite possible that it was none of these fruits. The name is not given. The results are what matter. And so poor Adam and Eve, that was the only wrong thing they ever did in their lives. But because of that, they lost their Eden home, and sin entered into the world. And for thousands of years, we have had to wrestle with sin. So the first humans were created perfect. They had the image of God, and those powers stayed with them more or less. But they kind of failed the test. It's like failing a final exam. And as a consequence, everyone else in the world came into that predicament. So the rest of the Bible, after Adam and Eve, deals with a world after sin, and this big problem had entered. A simple test. a pass and fail grade. Unfortunately, Adam and Eve did not pass, and neither do we. But they were the first humans, created in the image of God, implying that we are also partly in that image of God. The second major figure in the Bible stories is a man called Noah. Now, the Bible describes Noah as being a perfect man, as being completely acceptable to God, as being blameless. Now, the world he lived in was the opposite. In fact, the book of Genesis, which records his story, says that people had become so evil that every imagination of every thought of every moment was completely and totally evil, to the extent that God says it is time to destroy this planet. Well, not so much destroy as purge this planet. This cannot go on. These humans have exercised their powers that I gave them to great evil, so much so that very few of them even listen to God, other than Noah and his family. And so Noah was chosen by God to sort of help the world escape the punishment. Now, what is the punishment that God was going to send to purge the world? Well, think of it like putting the world into a giant cosmic washing machine. It would be washed up, filled with water, and the water would cleanse the planet, not just the humans, but the planet. So everything that is contaminated by this sin issue would then be washed away. But Noah was asked to build this giant ark or boat in which specimens of animal life would be kept, and his family. Now, I think that other people were given a choice, but this family was selected. Other people decided they didn't want the choice. Why bother getting into the ark? We can understand their problem. God says He's going to send rain. There's going to be so much rain that it will cover the earth. And they've never had rain. How would you react if people say something is going to happen, but you've never seen it? It's not in your experience. And so people didn't believe Noah. And sure enough, the flood came, washed the earth. The earth had a new beginning, and humans had a new beginning as well. So Noah, in a way, is kind of like a second Adam. Because with the first Adam, we have the original beginning, but that had to be purged. And so with Noah, we have a second beginning. And this is the man that God chose. This is the family that God chose. Would God choose your family? Would God choose you? Well, it depends on how you relate to God. Everyone who is chosen by God, it's because they have a unique and special relationship with God. Noah did. We don't know exactly what he did. Did he pray a lot? Did he worship a lot? Did he offer sacrifices a lot? Nothing is said. What we do know is he was the opposite of his world. You see, if you follow the world around you and only the world around you, everything can be really nasty. But when you choose to do what is the best, what is right, what is morally proper, then we are acceptable to God. And I hope that you can be a Noah in your world. If you find your world to be all messed up, maybe you can be the one to straighten it up. A third person who plays an important role in the Bible story is a man called Abraham. Abraham would be given some special titles. One of them is friend of God. In both parts of the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, he is called friend of God. In the New Testament, Abraham is called the father of faith, that he is the father, spiritually speaking, of all those who believe and trust and follow God. Now, we know that Abraham was called, he was chosen. He lived in Ur with his family, then they migrated north to Syria, and for a number of years they lived in a place called Padan Aram. And then God came to him. He was 75 years of age and says, Abraham, this is not your real home. I'm sending you somewhere else. Go where I'm asking you to go. Leave your father, leave your relatives, leave your land. And when you get to the land I want to give you, I will tell you you have arrived. Now, Abraham obeys God, well, to a point. You see, I've always wondered why Abraham is called the father of faith. I believe it's because his faith is very human, just like ours. He believes God. He leaves Padan Aram, but he did not leave all his relatives. He took a young nephew with him. His name was Lot. See, Abraham and his wife Sarah had no children. And so maybe he thought, I need some backup plan. And we discover Abraham was pretty good at the backup plans. Maybe this is why he's the father of faith, because he didn't just have one plan, he had another plan. When they get to the land of Canaan, God says, this is yours. And a short time after they were there, a major famine broke out, and Abraham packs up and he goes over to Egypt. He won't be the only person in the Bible to do that. But you see, Abraham always came up with something to do other than just sit on his hands, if you like. Yes, he believed God. Yes, he trusted God. But most importantly, he was very loyal to God. Wherever Abraham went, he would build an altar to God. So everybody around him, strangers, people not too friendly, people who wanted to make friends with him, they all would know Abraham has a special God. Look, he's always worshiping him. He's always building an altar. Eventually, God tested Abraham by asking him to sacrifice his son. And Abraham passed that test. Adam and Eve failed their test. Abraham passed the test. And so for the people of Israel, which is the dominant people group in the Bible, he is known as their father, in the sense that he is really the beginning of this so-called Israel nation. And this would be the model of faith, the model of relationship with God for the rest of the Bible. And so Abraham is the father of faith because he is willing to express his loyalty to God, even if it meant giving up everything he had. He didn't have to sacrifice Isaac, his son. No, that was never God's plan. But he did have to pass the test. It's like being a student. You cannot avoid the final exam. You have to do it, but it's not the only thing that matters. And so Abraham is the friend of God. Abraham is the father of faith. Would you like to be the friend of God? The next main character that we meet in the Bible, still in the book of Genesis, is Jacob, grandson of Abraham. He would become one of the most important names in the Bible. But he was not a nice person. He was born with his twin brother Esau. But everything that he did, from being a child in the mother's womb until his adult life, Jacob was good at one thing, and that is grabbing what is not his, of taking what isn't his, and trying to make it his own. The name Jacob, or Yaakov in Hebrew, means a grabber. When he was born, he was grabbing onto the heel of his brother Esau. You're not going to the world without me, I'm coming with you. He grabbed the birthright from Esau by tricking him. He grabbed the birth blessings from his father Isaac by tricking him. And when he had to run away from home, he went and lived with his uncle Laban, and the two of them were grabbing from each other. He was not a nice person. His last act of grabbing happened with God himself. On his return from Padan Aram back to the land of Canaan, he meets somebody by the river Jabbok, and they have this big wrestling match. And he realizes this is God that he's wrestling with. And he holds on to this being and he says, I will keep grabbing on you until you bless me. And so God blessed him and changed his name to Israel, or Yisrael. And that would be the name that matters the most in the Bible, because Israel becomes not just a physical name, a name of a physical nation, but it became a spiritual name, the name of God's people all through history. You and I are part of Israel if we believe in God. On his way out of the land of Canaan, Jacob had a special experience. He had a dream where he saw God on a staircase with angels going back and forth. When he woke up from that dream and realized he had been in the presence of God, he names the place Bethel, the house of God, because he felt that he had been in God's house. God loved this man. He wasn't even a very good father. He was quite dysfunctional as a father. But God made him into a nation, changed his name. You may wonder, what does the name Israel mean? Israel means to wrestle with God and be victorious. So his grabbing proved to be a good thing in the end, because he was able to hold on to God and to the blessings of God. Yes, there were problems in his family because of his dysfunction as a father, but he became the real father of the people of Israel. And so whenever the history of Israel is written, they would always refer to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jacob is the one who would have 12 sons, and from those 12 sons would come the 12 tribes of Israel. Why does God choose such an odd character? Well, God sees things in people that we may not always see. You may think of yourself as strange, maybe not a really nice person, or maybe not very useful or beneficial to anyone. But you never know how God may look at you. You may be a grabber, a Yaakov, but God can make you an Israel. The next major character is one of the sons of Jacob by the name of Joseph. Now we have to understand the context of Joseph. Jacob had 4 wives, but only one that he really chose and that he loved more, and that was Rachel. But Rachel could not have children for a long time until very late in her life. And so Joseph was the first son. She, in fact, had only 2 sons. Joseph was the first son that she had. Great trouble when the sons were born. And Jacob loved Joseph more than all his other sons. By the time Joseph was born, there were already 10 brothers from the other 3 wives. But Jacob favored him. He became the spoiled brat. He became the person that was loved by his father. And this young boy had dreams where he saw the brothers bow to him, and that angered them a great deal. But there was one pretty nasty thing that the story tells us. It says that even as a young boy, he would bring evil reports. The Hebrew word is evil. Evil reports to the father about the brothers. We surmise that these were probably false reports. He would make up stories. Oh, they did this, they did that, to gain more favor with his father. Father gave him a special robe to wear to signify, he is my chosen heir. The brothers would have none of it. So on one of those shepherd trips, they were way out in Dothan. Joseph comes, sent by the father to bring food, but he wears that fancy coat, and it instigates, it triggers anger, and they were ready to kill him. But not all of them did. Not all of them had the same thoughts. Reuben had plans to rescue him. Judah came up with a better plan. First, throw him in a well, a dry well, and then when some traders came by, sell him off as a slave. And Joseph would end up in Egypt. In Egypt, he would go through some hard experiences, first in the house of Potiphar, the captain of the king's guard, and then in the prison. But eventually he gets promoted to the vizier or the governor, or think of it like the vice king or vice president of Egypt. And then a huge famine breaks out, and his brothers arrive in Egypt to buy food. Now the story is a bit complicated, but eventually there was a making up, and the brothers were reconciled. But on his deathbed, Jacob realized that Joseph is not the one who will be the heir to the family and to the line of God. That would go somewhere else. But he still gave a lot of blessings and prophecies about Joseph. And the 2 sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, became very large tribes within Israel. But that is Joseph. He followed God. He served God. He had some failings as a human. His life was a bit like a roller coaster. Every time something good happened, something bad would happen, But ultimately, God was able to use him to save the entire family from the famine and ensure the survival of the promises made to Abraham and Jacob. Are you a Joseph, a bit of a dreamer, a bit of a dreamer scheming to succeed in life, maybe you need to give your life to God and He will help you really succeed the way He wants you to succeed. Judah was the fourth son of Jacob, and he realized fairly early that he would have no chance of the inheritance. He's too far down the line. Joseph was the favorite one, then Reuben was the first, Simeon and Levi. He is like the fifth in line. Look at what's happening with the royal family in England. All that lineage and the trouble that it causes. He was the one who suggested not to kill Joseph, but instead to sell him as a slave and then trick the father into believing an animal had killed him. So not a great beginning. But he leaves the family, probably very much disturbed by the sorrow of his father, or maybe wanting to start his own clan. His son marries, but the son was evil and he dies, and he forced the second boy to marry that widow, but he didn't like it and he got killed too. Finally, he leaves. He's left with only one son, and he sends this widow, her name was Tamar, away. But she was a resourceful woman, and she finds a way to trick Judah into having a child with her, and that would become his heir. But you see, in every story that we meet, first with Joseph, and then with Tamar, and later on in Egypt, when they took Benjamin to buy grain, and Joseph decides he will be removed from the others, they can all go, only he must stay. It was it was Judah, this fourth son of Jacob, who was always trying to save somebody. By convincing the brothers, rather than fighting all of them, to sell Joseph, he actually gave Joseph a second chance of life because he was safer in Egypt than he was at home. By allowing Tamar to raise up her sons, which he didn't even know were his at the beginning, he saved her life, when actually by law she should have been put to death because she cheated on her dead husband. It's a very strange time. And then, of course, he argued on behalf of Simeon being put in prison, and then on behalf of Benjamin being made a slave by Joseph. Of course, this was before the brothers were reconciled. And so every time we meet Judah, he is the one who is trying to save somebody. Eventually, even Jacob becomes completely dependent on him, and he would look after the family, inherit the family line. Before he died, Jacob, as he made blessings and prophecies about all his sons, he announced that Judah would be the heir, and that a king, a messianic king, would come through his family, and that rulership would never leave the house of Judah. Eventually, the great King David and his son Solomon would come from Judah's family, and ultimately the Messiah, Jesus himself, would come from Judah's family. It may seem to you that you don't have much to offer, that maybe not many chances to your life. But if you're willing to be beneficial to humanity, then God will find a way to bless you like he did with Judah. It is impossible to talk about the Old Testament and not meet one of the outstanding figures. His name was Moses, Moshe in Hebrew. As a baby, he escaped the massacre that the Pharaoh, who hated the Hebrew people, when the mother put him in this waterproof basket, and the princess of Egypt finds him in the river and adopts him, becomes an Egyptian prince, trained maybe to be the next Pharaoh. And for 40 years, he lived that life, all the education, all the warrior skills. Then he has an identity crisis and realizes, wait, really, I am Hebrew. I am part of Israel. So he kills an Egyptian, becomes a murderer, and runs away to Midian, which is in northern Saudi Arabia today. And there he marries a shepherd girl. He lives with this shepherd called Jethro, who is also incidentally called priest of God. And there he learns about Yahweh and unlearns all those Egyptian gods that he grew up with. And after his life had passed for 40 years as a shepherd, leading these animals, taking care of them, God comes and says, go back to Egypt. You will be my deliverer. You will bring my people out. Moses doesn't like the idea. He argues against it, but eventually he has to go. God gives him power, gives him miracles and signs. He goes back to Egypt. He performs some miracles and brought the Egyptian empire down and delivers his people. But the two things that we need to remember most about Moses is that he was the first lawgiver. Every instruction that God wanted to give Israel, he passed it down to Moses. And Moses would write it on tablets, place it in that special box called the ark, and he would be the one to instruct the people. This is what you must do, this is what you must not do. This is what God wants, this is what God does not want. And so the laws of the Bible were almost all of them written by this man, Moses. But the second main thing about Moses is he was a builder. God came to him one day as they were in the desert after leaving Egypt. Make a sanctuary for me so that I may live among you. Later on in this series, you will learn more about the sanctuary. And so they made the sanctuary, the special place, right in the center of the camp where the people of Israel could live. And that sanctuary became the symbol that God lived among them. Moses was the only person in the Bible who had a very close contact with God, literally in the presence of God. Lawgiver, builder, and in a sense, he was the builder of the nation of Israel that plays such a pivotal role in the history of the Bible. That was built by Moses. But he was also an example of a deliverer, somebody who brings people out of danger, brings people out of slavery and gives them freedom and liberation. In that way, he is kind of like a coming Jesus. He provided that picture of what it would be like when the real deliverer comes. You know, Moses didn't like the call of God. Many of us may not like the call of God, but ultimately he was willing to accept that call of God. And if we are, God can do great things through each one of us as well. Joshua was the assistant leader of Israel, the assistant to Moses, for 40 years. He grew up as a slave in Egypt, and the only life he knew before the Exodus was slavery. And then Moses returns to Egypt, Joshua becomes his assistant, and they brought the people out of Egypt. He saw all those great miracles, the parting of the seas, the falling of the manna, water coming out of rocks, and he trained to be a soldier. Eventually, he became the general of Israel's armies. All the battles, Moses never actually went up front into the battlefield. It was Joshua who trained and led. And when Moses passed away, God made Joshua the leader. He had 40 years of apprenticeship, 40 years of training under Moses, the servant of God, and he became the commander of God. He had a special connection with God. When they were about to enter the land of Canaan, God appears to Joshua like he did to Moses, made the same promises, asked him to travel straight. Do not go to the right or to the left. Keep your eyes straight. Follow everything Moses taught you, and I will make sure that you succeed. And Joshua brought the people of Israel this finely tuned army. They had won many battles in the desert. Now they were ready to conquer the land. And he was their leader for a number of years. Near the end of his life, after the people were more or less settled through the land of Canaan, Joshua knew that his time was up. But he also knew that his people were not always very faithful. He saw how they had rebelled against Moses the first time they tried to enter the land, how God had punished them by keeping an entire generation in the desert. Only he and Caleb, from that original generation who came out of Egypt, were actually able to enter the land. And so Joshua gathered the people again. He says, I'm about to go. My time is up. I'm a very old man. You need to choose whether you will really follow God or not. That's the last thing we hear about Joshua, this attempt to make the people understand their commitment to the covenant, the agreement that they had made with God through Moses. And he said to them, I don't know what your choices will be, but I know what my choice and my family's choice will be. We will always serve God. Now, we cannot always compel people to follow, to believe, to trust, to choose God. But we can look at our own lives. We can say, like Joshua, as for myself, as for my family, we will follow God, and hope that our example will be an example for everyone else as well.